talking to this campaign today. I know someone.
Dean Obadallah. He wants to be your Muslim friend.
Most Muslims, I know many, are great people.
Watch this.
People.
You're listening to the Dean Obadallah Show, where comedy meets politics and all things in between.
And welcome back, Dean Obadallah Show. We're live Monday, October 21st. Now with us, in between her flights to Brazil and India, where she's been going, Jamira Burley, internationally recognized speaker, social justice advocate. She worked on the Hillary campaign. She fills in a lot, guest hosting on SiriusXM Progress. Jamira, nice to see you.
Hey, what's up?
What time zone are you in right now? Are you
I'm not really sure, actually. I'm not really sure.
What's time zone in Brazil, by the way?
It's just a 1 hour difference. But before Brazil, I was actually Bahrain, yeah.
Way out there.
For a women's conference, yeah, of all places.
That's far.
Yes, I was there for 2 days, and then I went from there to Brazil.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. So yeah.
I've been to Bahrain. I flew into Bahrain and then crossed the bridge into Saudi Arabia years ago to do comedy.
You went to Saudi Arabia to do comedy?
Twice. I did
that
shows
sounds like
places.
comedy.
It's actually really good. In fact, I interviewed a woman today and the producer of a new documentary about women driving in Saudi, which we're going to play on the show, I think, Wednesday night, but about their own struggles to get away from guardianship and things. But when you talk about the oppression of women, they talk about it there. And I can't help but add, look what's happening in America with men generally in red states trying to oppress women, trying to pull back gender equality as much as possible. And if they can have their way, it's just about controlling women. I mean, that's all it's about. So whatever you're going to do, reproductive freedom is one of the ultimate ways. Not letting them drive. Now women can drive in Saudi, but not doing that for all these years was simply a way to control women.
I mean, yeah, but also oftentimes when America criticizes other country human rights conditions, it's pretty hilarious when you think about, because America is actually ranked as one of the most unsafe places for women.
Really?
And a lot of the things we criticize other people for, like child marriage, like mortality rates, all of those things are horrible here. Like our numbers are compared to very, very developed countries in many ways. So it's pretty entertaining. But I will say that it doesn't matter what culture or what society you're in. All of them seems to want to find a way to control women and their actions as a power trip. I don't know, to feel better about themselves. I don't know, but it's pretty disturbing, regardless of whether or not you're in a democracy versus a dictatorship. Everyone is still looking for ways to kind of control women.
It's, when people, you can use any of the three texts of the faiths we have here in the West, of Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. You can read things in any one of those to oppress women if you want to do it. It's not, and some it's even easier than others. The New Testament is better, but still it's got some things about women. Not have women teach to me and learn in silence, that kind of stuff. Old Testament, the Quran's got more troubling things in it that are very on your nose. And if you're going to follow those, literally, it's going to lead to a result where you're supporting gender inequality and you're supporting oppression of women and doing it in the name of your faith, which is horrible.
But it just doesn't make sense. These are the people who literally birth a nation. Like men couldn't even go through half the pain that women do in labor. It's kind of entertaining when you think about it. The fact that oftentimes women are seen as weak and need to be controlled because they're not smart enough, strong enough. And in many cases, they've proved to be just the opposite.
I didn't even think about the idea of the pain women. I mean, I've thought about
simulators. You should do one for the radio show.
Never.
You should do one. Can we organize where you do one?
I stub my toe and I'm laying in a fetal position for like an hour. I'm like, I can't walk.
You could use this as material.
Why would I want to put pain to myself?
So you can see what women go through,
which
your mother went through.
Right. I've no doubt it's horrible. I've no doubt. So can't I just have empathy and compassion?
No, you should do the simulation.
That's not.
I want to watch this.
I don't even know how that works. So let's. Last night, a brand new HBO series kicked off, and we're not doing a review of the series. It's how it started, and I asked Jamira if this is a topic that she'd want to talk about. She goes, "Yeah, I actually talk about this a lot." But the beginning of a new series, Watchmen on HBO, begins with the 1921 massacre. They call it race riot. It was a massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, of what was then Black Wall Street, what was known. And the town actually was called Greenwood. It was Greenwood section of Tulsa, which was affluent black neighborhood. Tell us a little bit about before 1921, before this massacre. What was this area about?
I mean, it was a community of more than 300 businesses, Black-owned businesses, from banks to movie theaters to laundromats to to locksmith. There was just a range of different type of businesses because during that time, many black folks, their money was not good in town, right? So white businesses would not accept their money. They wouldn't hire these folks. And so as a way to build generational wealth and wealth within the community, black owners, homeowners started to open small businesses that eventually grew to this entire neighborhood of more than 300 businesses with thousands of residents across the board. And most people were living relatively middle class. And in some cases, there were billionaires within that community, all thriving, living amongst each other. The violence was relatively low. And literally within the span of 2 days, it wiped out an entire neighborhood and a history of folks who were never received any type of atonement or money back from the insurance companies that rejected their claims. So it's just the generational trauma that was placed on that community has never been reconciled with.
It's interesting. The idea of Black Wall Street and the massacre that happened in 1921 was not something I learned in school.
Yeah.
And it seems to be by design that people wanted to cover this up. I learned about it literally from listeners on the show who had called me and brought this up a few times and made me Google it. So when I saw the beginning of Watchmen, I'm like, oh, that's Black Wall Street. There it is. And the details are, I mean, they had luxury shops, they had restaurants, grocery stores, they had 2 black-owned newspapers, bus and cab services, nationally recognized school system. Some renowned doctors lived there and everything. I mean, it really was.
There was a pilot who had his own plane.
That's what I said. There were 6 private airplanes. So about 100,000 people living in the Greenwood section of Tulsa. And then what we've seen through history in America is the pretense of somehow a black guy said something inadvertent to a white woman or made her feel uncomfortable, or which turned out not to be true at all.
Yeah.
But in this case, that was the pretense. And then a white mob came in May 30th, 1921 They came there, they wanted to lynch him. And the black community knew exactly what was up. So they stood to try to prevent this.
Yeah.
And then it became a massacre for 2 days.
Yeah, and people used to describe it, to your point, as a riot. A riot would assume that these folks had equal protection by the law, which in many cases they saw that there were many police officers dressed like Klansmen showing up to the massacre. And also many of those folks didn't have guns, right? They didn't have bombs. They were thrown. There were guns. They were shot. Their homes were burnt down. There is even instances of young children recanting their experience, talking about how they hid under the table as people threw those liquid bombs into the window to like
cocktail and that kind of stuff.
And so it's just mind-boggling to think about the total disregard for life for that community and the lack of legal response or legal recourse that community had because the police was oftentimes seen as the perpetrator.
And according to historians, and again, a lot of this is from word of mouth from people put together as a story, because there's no doubt it was trying to be covered up and suppressed, and that's why we don't learn about it in school. They talk about 40 square blocks of business and residential property being just destroyed, people being burned alive, at least 300 African Americans killed, their bodies dumped in mass graves in the Arkansas River. And
that's like half of Manhattan.
It's just already burned to the ground.
Yeah.
And wide-scale looting by these white supremacists of these beautiful black homes and properties. And according to historians at the Smithsonian, it said, historians identify white animosity towards the successful black people as one of the leading causes of the riot. It was just jealousy. So they killed them, they stole, they looted from their houses, and then they burned the property down. And we don't even learn about it. I mean, I was so happy in a way that Watchmen began their series with that. And then it flashed forward to more present day, or even the future, actually, flash forward. But like when you hear about this story and the fact it gets no press coverage, what does it make you feel like?
I mean, it's first of all, let me clarify. I grew up in West Philadelphia, and so I'm well aware of incidents like the Move, the bombing of the Move community in North Philly, and so or West Philadelphia section of Philadelphia. And so I thought for many instances that was the only incident in where black folks were bombed on an American community. And then when I started working for Amnesty International a few years ago, we got approached by the filmmakers of the documentary around the Black Wall Street for Tulsa. And we did a series where we did conversations around the country. And so many people did not know about it. I mean, people who had grew up close to Tulsa didn't know about it because there were to your point, lack of records or lack of people talking about it. And even to this day, I think the last survivor of it died a few years ago in 2016. And so they were able to burn it. I mean, they were able to kind of burn not only that community, but the history behind it, because those people didn't have access to any type of accountability mechanism. They didn't have any type of access to media to be able to get their stories out there. And so still to this day, you have people in Tulsa not really dealing with the repercussions, but the families of those white supremacists still live there. And so there might not be families of the Black communities that were traumatized, but those families of the people who burned down those neighborhoods still live there. And they haven't really grappled with the fact that their family wealth or their family statue might have been built off the death and burning of an entire Black community.
And I imagine some of them, not all of them, are Trump supporters. I'm going to be blunt. I mean,
some of them.
Who knows? It's also interesting in this series, it opened up with the clip from, it was live action of the play Oklahoma, which was in a way it ignored this reality of what happened, and it became this, just Oklahoma, okay, and everything's fine. There's so much of our history that's kept from us. I'm reading a book about Native Americans now and the history of what went on here and the horrific treatment of Native Americans. And I think we get a sense, a little bit in school, you get a sense that we did some bad things. When you read the detail, you're like, oh my God, this is really, really bad. I wasn't here. My family, none of my family were here. Thank God. I'm distancing myself from the crazy, horrible white people.
They tried to cleanse the U.S. of Native Americans.
And in the case of
Trail of Tears, oh my
God.
God.
And in the case of African Americans, the twisted, perverted irony in all this, that African Americans were brought here by these white supremacists who wanted their labor, and then when they would get free, didn't want them here anymore. They want them to go back to wherever they're from. And to this day, that stays intertwined in our society.
When people say, go back to where you came from.
Like Trump said.
Motherfucker, I was brought here. What do you mean? You go back to where you came from.
So when Trump was doing the send her back stuff, and his crowd was cheering send her back, that was a white supremacist chant.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And Trump has done his best in a way, I think, to keep. Even he got, not that I'm sure he was happy with it. He wanted more of the whistle, because even Republicans like, that is just, we like our bigotry a little bit more refined, a little bit more subtle than that. This is off the chart stuff. So it's the same garbage. But interestingly, a new poll came out today, which we could just file under but it said public religion research found 57% of Americans think Trump's decisions and behavior have encouraged white supremacists. Now, I wish that number was higher, but here's the interesting thing. Here's the heart. Only 6% of Americans think that Trump's behavior has discouraged white supremacy. So there's 6% of Americans who are like, what he is doing by defending white supremacy, defending the white supremacist statue and all that, is actually discouraging it. But what's interesting is the way it breaks down demographically. No surprise. Among white Americans, 49% say he's encouraged racist groups, meaning 51% do not think. 77% of African Americans said, 70% of Hispanics, like, just he's encouraged bad things. Guess what? The one group that's on his side of the subset of white people who are like, oh no, he's fine.
Evangelicals.
Yeah, white evangelicals.
Gotta love people who are the closest to the Bible. I don't know what Jesus they claim, but I don't see any of that in the Bible, of what they are promoting. Because these are the same people that were okay with him locking up kids in cages. And I'm just like, what the fuck is wrong with y'all? Like, at what point? But it's, to your point that you mentioned earlier, is this ideology of folks really being afraid that they are going to become the minority. And they've seen how minorities have treated in this country, and they don't want to be treated like that way. But it's overlooking the fact that minorities still lack any real political or legal control over the systems.
When you think about the Klan burning a cross and wearing a big cross, and some Klan members have been interviewed and have said, we're not a hate group or a Christian group. And I want to say, Jesus Christ was brown, okay? You know that. He wasn't a white guy living in the Middle East. He was Jewish, but he was truly Semitic. He was from the Middle East, right? So you're worshiping a brown guy, yet they have reinvented him as the white blonde hair Norwegian guy that we see all over. And that's, again, another fiction. And that fiction is less troubling than, to me, the cover-up of our history, that we're not told about how we got this nation. We're not told about Native American. We're not told about, with African Americans, if it wasn't for a push from your community to be represented in the media, especially decades ago, and to have shows and authors writing books like Alex Haley about Roots and stuff. I mean, Roots probably brought the slave life home to people in a way that they had no clue, didn't want to know, were never taught. They, slavery's bad. And then you see it and you're like, well, that's bad. And then you see, like 7 Years a Slave, and you're like, oh my God, this is even worse than Roots. I mean, there's no fun part in this. Like,
I mean,
Roots had fun stuff.
I also just read an article recently that was talking about, oftentimes when we think of slavery, we think of slave master, right? The role of the man. But I read an article recently that there were many laws put in place in the South, specifically for white slave owners who were killing the babies of women, of slaves, because they were beating the babies to death, or like they were beating slaves to death. And they had to create laws that saw the white rage of that woman as not a crime, but as a result of her having to deal with slavery because it was a part of the economic structure. So it's just there's so much still to learn that we haven't uncovered, that I think forces us all to ask the question of, one, the lies that we've been told about each other that have made us create this kind of hate ecosystem that we all have to live in, but also just how the things that humans can do to each other, I think, are extremely brutal and disheartening. Yeah, like I cuss people out and I feel sorry the next day. And I'm just like, maybe I shouldn't have talked that way. I couldn't imagine doing half the things that I've read about and like being able to sleep at night.
Do you think in the schools, I don't want to say mandated, like where you sit around and go, like, you have to teach this stuff, but do you think it would be beneficial to our society if young children were taught about all the horrors of slavery, all the horrors of what we did, not we, but collectively America did to Native Americans, and not just tell the story about the idea of manifest destiny and go west, young man, and all that, without knowing what happened when we went west and what we did to the people, and slavery, and how I imagine now kids are learning 400 years of slavery because this is the anniversary. I imagine in grade, I don't know for sure. I imagine they do. At least there's an opportunity to. We didn't learn much about slavery growing up. I mean, a little bit, but not much. But don't you think, is there a benefit? You think it's worthwhile to make this part of the curriculum around the country?
Yes, I think it's worthwhile telling the full story of America. Like, if we're going to talk about American history, we have to give the full story. But also, I would encourage that when we talk about African history, that it's not just starting at slavery, right? Because I think we give the false narrative to particularly young Black kids that their identity is only associated with slavery, as if they didn't come from a community, a culture of people who have also led civilizations and who have been kings and queens. And so I think there is a requirement to tell the full story of America that talks about the success of our culture, but also talks about the things that we hide under the bed when it makes us all look bad, right? Because it allows for white people to be able to turn a blind eye and say that these things didn't happen because they weren't taught it. So yeah, tell the full story of America, but also don't start Black history at just the moment in which slavery came to these shores.
Because I didn't even think about that. I thought, well, started then, but you're right. If you're talking about Black history, it predates coming here as slaves. It's a whole civilization.
Yeah. Imagine trying to imagine think about trying to imagine yourself as anything else if your entire history on this country has been about oppression and abuse. And that's what it is for many Black kids in America. It's like, it's only been, the history you read about is about oppression, slavery, Jim Crow, still to this day, police brutality. And so I think if we're going to give people a full view of who they are and where they've come from, it has to go beyond the shores of America.
When you talk to millennials and people even younger than yourself.
Yeah, Gen Zers.
That's what they are? Everyone's got, is there a name before that now?
No.
Not yet. There will be.
They're at the end of the alphabet.
Oh, that's right. Maybe they'll be ZZ or
number ones. They'll be
number one.
A's.
But when you talk to young kids who are African American and they're growing up in this country, do you get a sense that they have an appetite to learn about the history of African Americans, that the long history going all the way back to Africa, or is it more about just living in America today in the present and trying to succeed in our climate?
I think it's a combination. I think it depends on where these young people are coming from. Oftentimes you have young people who have never left their zip code, and so trying to see beyond that is hard for them. So it's all about like exposure. Prime example, when I used to work for the mayor, I had my sister meet me at my office, and I was like, come down to City Hall. And she had no idea where City Hall was. And she had walked past this building dozens of times. And so I do think we have to expose young people to be able to ask those questions of themselves. But then I do think there is a population of people, particularly young millennials and Gen Zers, who are making that trip home. A lot of folks are going back to the continent because I think when I was growing up, the only images of Africa was of like this desert type land of like people running around with no clothes on and living amongst the animals. Right. And what we now know that is not true. And so there's so much thriving life and innovation that's happening in Africa. And I know a lot of people who are either traveling there or who have migrated there.
So you bring up something I haven't even thought about, frankly, is that if you're Italian American, even if you're 3 generations, you might go like, we're going to go to Italy and see the ancestors, even if we're not connected. Or if you're Irish or whatever you might be, German, the whole and Arab, of course, same thing. If you're black and you've been here for 4 or 5 generations, how many people go back? Because I didn't even think about that. Because they'll say, "Hey, we're going to go visit the ancestors. We're going home."
Yeah.
First, do most black people, if they descended of slaves, know which part of Africa they're
Hell
from?
no.
So
And
they
I
have no
mean,
idea.
and the interesting thing about like the DNA test that is very popular right now, right? These know your ancestry tests is that they can only give you a percentage, right?
Right, exactly.
And we know the slaves came from many different parts of Africa, and we also know that during their time here in America, there was a lot of mixing of races, and I say that in quotations because race is a made-up concept.
Right.
So no, most people do not know. Most, and I mean like 90% of folks do not know where they came from. We're talking about an entire population who was stripped of their heritage, of their language here in the United States, and that was not passed down, unfortunately. So I think that's one of the struggles that African Americans have with themselves, is that there is no place to call home beyond America. And it's sad because America has never treated them like this is their home. So imagine the internal battles of there being nowhere where you feel fully welcomed or fully at peace with where you are.
It's for different reasons, but my fiance has that same. She's an actress. She's working on a one-person show, and it's all about that. It's tentatively called Home, and she is Palestinian, born in Israel, so she's not wanted there. But because she's Israeli, because of her passport, she's not wanted in the Arab world.
Wow.
And then she comes here to America. There's only 2 Arab countries you can go to if you have an Israeli passport: Egypt and Jordan. So you can't travel to the other countries unless you get special permission, which you can for like a big conference or something. But beyond that, you just can't freely go over. And even if you go to Egypt and you say, "Well, I'm Arab, I'm Palestinian," it says Israeli passport. They view you as a traitor. So you're not wanted in your country. You're not wanted by the Arabs. So she came here. And on some levels, there's opportunity. But to be frank, I mean, being a Middle Eastern, an Arab immigrant who's Muslim in America during the time of Trump makes it even harder. Although New York is a unique place to live.
Yeah.
It's not America. I have to be honest. New York to me feels like a special place that's different than the rest of the country. And I haven't lived everywhere, but we're such a melting pot.
Yeah.
Every bus ride, every subway I take.
You could be sitting next to someone who's making 10 times more than you, or sometimes a homeless man, right? Like that's the beauty of New York. It's so funny you mentioned that because one of the things that I find really racist about the world is actually passports and the privilege that passports allow depending on where you come from in the world. And if you look at the countries who have the most privilege, it is mostly westernized countries. And so imagine trying to navigate and find mobility elsewhere. You can't travel. You don't have that ability. And oftentimes you are labeled as a terrorist or a criminal because of where you were born versus who you actually are.
It's also interesting if you look at passports from other countries, like in the Middle East. Almost all the countries I've been to, on your passport it says your religion.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And
I don't answer those
Lebanon, right? We don't have that here, but you
Yeah.
go there because there's not. Everyone might be Arab. Let's say in an Arab country, the sectarian divide will be based on your religion. So you go to Lebanon, and if you're a Christian, you're treated one way. If you're Sunni Muslim, you're treated a different way. If you're Shia Muslim, you're treated different.
Yeah.
Even among Christians, there's the Maronites, there's the Catholic.
Wow.
So you have this, and you go to the Middle East all over. Saudi Arabia, if you're not Muslim, you're coming to that country, you need special permission. Like if I want to go as a Muslim, I can go on Hajj anytime, any year,
That's
when
amazing.
I want. But if you're not Muslim, you can't get like a tourist visa to Riyadh in Saudi. You're not going to do it unless you're Muslim. So the religion there.
Yeah.
And I'm glad
As
we
another
don't,
label.
I'm glad we don't have our religion on our passport. We shouldn't have it. And I'm sure my atheist friends who call up are so happy. It doesn't say atheist on their passport.
I don't know. Give it time. We now have to get real IDs in the U.S. So
You're right. It could. I could see Trump and especially the Pence's more than Trump. He's godless. But Pence, who wants Christian Sharia law, would want your religion on it. I just wrote an article for the Daily Beast on Friday, and I talked about it on the show that Trump, the way that he's imposed and made Christian lives, made it clear they're a priority and that Muslim lives don't matter. It's not just in these wars and stuff. That the number of refugees Obama brought in 2016, the percentage of Muslim versus Christian was almost 50%. Now, under Trump, this year, fiscal year, 80% Christian, 20% Muslim. And the number, And there was 40,000 Muslim refugees brought in. Obama's last year was 4,000 this year. So 10%. You cannot say more to my face that Muslim lives don't matter to Trump and this, and that doesn't represent America. It's just this administration, because Muslim lives are fine. We get our crap like every other community of color, and there's sometimes bad times for us and good times for us. But this administration, Muslim lives do not matter at all.
But it's interesting because around the world, like, Christians kind of back each other. And I think if we were discriminating against Christians, like, the church would stand up, versus you don't see that happening with the Muslim community, right? Like, Trump still are friends with many Muslim country leaders, and they're not pushing back. No, they're not pushing back. So I think it gives him free range to do whatever the hell he wants at any moment.
And that's such a great point, because as Trump was calling for a Muslim ban on us in 2015 and the 16, and then demonizing Muslims, there was not one Muslim country that stood up for Muslims in America. And it shows the disconnect, because they're about power. They're about the benefits of their own nation, not about Muslims as a big sense of a family, let's say, like we're the whole Muslim world out there.
And the repercussions of that, right? If he's criminalizing you now individually, imagine that gives him only the ability to criminalize an entire country later.
And BS is his buddy. Erdogan's his buddy. Sisi are his buddies. He doesn't. None of them are bringing up Muslims in America. I can assure you.
No, because he allows them to get away with assassinations within embassies.
Right,
you know.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with more of the Dean Obeidallah Show right after this, and our friend Jamira Burley. At this point, the question is not who connected to Donald Trump is a criminal. The question is anyone connected to Donald Trump who's not a criminal?
The Dean Obeidallah Show. Sirius XM Progress. New perspectives, important voices, influential ideas.
This is the Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
No, I'll show you.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live here Monday, October 21st. I'm here with Jamira Burley. We're laughing because she told me, she was explaining to me Cory Booker's image he put on, responding to the issue we're going to talk about now, which is Tulsi Gabbard and Hillary Clinton and the battle. I'm not going to say it's a big battle, but it's one the media loves, because the media loves when Democrats fight each other. They love Democrats killing each other. It's the greatest dream for those in the media who want to say, hey, look, we're fair, we cover everything. And then they try to put fuel on that fire as much as possible. But there is an issue raised that's real here, and it's what you have an image of. That's funny. It's a funny image of zooming in of Cory. So I think everyone knows what happened. Hillary Clinton was on a podcast, did not mention Tulsi by name, but talked about I think the Russians have their eye on someone who's currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be a third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians. They have a bunch of sites and bots and other ways of supporting her so far. She does not mention who that is. She goes after Jill Stein by name, calling her a Russian asset. Later, though, Hillary was asked, did you mean Tulsi Gabbard? And she said, if the Russian nesting doll fits, and left it at that. So we all know that she meant it. So she was being funny, but snide at the same time. And the truth, let's just be honest, because I went back and looked at reporting from February of this year, before Tulsi even announced, there were media reports at NBC News that Russian bots, for some reason, liked Tulsi Gabbard.
They were pushing out her stuff for months.
They were pushing it. So there's now, I don't know why David Duke and the white supremacists have embraced her, because to be very clear, Tulsi Gabbard's been very, very clear in vocally slamming David Duke, talking about her father being a man of color who could not even drink water at white fountains. So that she's not been as full-throated in pushing it back against the Russian bots. I can only think with the Russians is that she was, I'm not going to say defending Assad, that's too simple, but she was willing to talk about Assad in terms that we are not used to in America, which is like, he's the enemy, he's the devil, all that kind of stuff. And Assad is propped up by the Russians. So I think the Russians like that. Yeah. So whatever, the bots could be a handful of Russian people that are running the whole system. But besides getting into that, what do you make of Hillary Clinton? She did not say her by name, but later confirmed it was her. What do you make of her? She has the freedom to talk about anything she wants. I want to put that at the outset. I'm not good saying she can't say it. Do you think it's constructive to anyone, though, that if a former nominee gets involved in talking, like if John Kerry were to come out and start saying things about some of the candidates, I would be troubled. I know the media loves to go after Hillary because it gets clicks. We all know that, so it's unfair to Hillary. So I'm trying to be really responsible here. I
think it's fair considering the context of where we are, right? Okay. Like her election was relatively new. I mean, it was relatively recent. And specifically, there was Russian interference in that election. And since that election, there has been no real governmental intervention to prevent that influence from happening again. And so I think it's fair for anyone to criticize right now potential Russia influence and potential Russia backing a candidate or doing things to appear as if they're backing a candidate in order to screw up the election. And so I think it was pretty, I think Tulsi makes herself an easy target oftentimes because she doesn't come across as authentic. And it always seems like she's hiding something or she has alternative motives. So when I looked at, because I didn't know at first what the hell was happening, I was just like, why is this woman who I can't stand trending on Twitter? and then I saw it and I started to laugh because I was just like, she literally is, if I had to think about a Russian bot, I would say it was Tulsi. She reminds me of that in real life. And
by the way, I made a mistake. I misspoke when I said that Clinton said if the Russian nesting doll fits. It was Nick Merrill, an aide to her. Yeah. But apparently, and I've not seen the clip, but Ayman Mohadeen was talking about it before. I didn't actually see the clip that Hillary confirmed it was Tulsi she was referring to. So she didn't say it in the snide way. Nick Merrill did say that if nesting doll fits. I will say this about Tulsi Gabbard, and there are people who like Tulsi who get upset. And I tweeted about this, and progressives were retweeting it, and the Tulsi people were coming after me. I was just pointing out the truth, the same truth that Michelangelo Signorelli's pointed out. We've invited her on. In fact, Friday, again, we reached out to her campaign. We've invited her on so many times, and not to be an ambush, the same way of all the 2020 candidates on. And I asked, some questions here or there that push back, but only my goal is not to break them. This is not 60 Minutes. They're coming on to share their story about what they stand for to the Democratic audience.
Yeah.
So I'm not here to go, but what about this on July 3rd, 1979 or something? That's not what we're doing here. Let them present themselves. We can fact check together. We can Google it later, whatever. And we want to invite her on. And I've had on some people on the right who love her go, well, you don't get any of the candidates. I've got on everyone but Biden, the top tier. I've had Liz Warren. I had Beto O'Rourke. I had Bernie Sanders last week, the first interview he did after his heart attack for radio. He came on here. Tom Steyer. The list goes on. Julian Castro. People who've dropped out. Jay Inslee and Bill and Steve Bullock. And so many. So the point is, myself and Michelangelo, I can speak for us because we've talked about it, have invited her on. She says no, but she says yes to Tucker Carlson over and over. And in fact, just Friday. So
it's just like, who are you trying to win over?
That's exactly
for what purpose?
She's made a choice. She does not want to reach out to progressives. She wants to reach out to Tucker Carlson's audience, which I can see in a general election as a strategy, but not in the Democratic primary.
Because you have to win the fucking nomination first.
Right.
Duh, dummy. And also, it's just like, I'm so sick. I mean, and this is not just Tulsi. There's actually a number of candidates who have done this. Is secure your base first. Like if you're so worried in the beginning stages before you even get the nomination on what the other side is going to do, because the other side is not thinking about getting Democratic voters. Like they're not coming to our communities. They're not doing any of this. And I think it's frustrating for voters who are diehard Democrats feeling like the base isn't listening to them, but they're creating opportunities or policies that speak to the other side that oftentimes doesn't give a fuck about whether or not we live or die. And I'm just like, what are y'all doing?
And you know, if Tulsi was going on MS and Fox News and CNN, it would be different.
Yeah.
She's not. She's made a choice. She went on.
That's why she seems sketchy.
Right. She went on MS. She went on MS like a month or two ago and got a lot of pushback. I think it was Katie Tur or someone. Maybe Katie was on maternity leave then still, but someone. And she didn't like it, and so she's not gone back. And I think on many of the shows, she'd be welcome as a 2020 candidate. She's in the middle tier. She's a legitimate candidate. She could be in someone's administration. Could she win the nomination? Probably unlikely, just like unlikely anyone else at 2 or 3% at this point.
Yeah.
Just about 100 days from the first caucus is going to win. If you're not in the middle, I don't think if you're in the top or middle tier, it's unlikely if you're at 2 or 3%. It could happen, but very unlikely where we are. But so, all right, let's take another quick break. If people want to talk to you about African American history, do you want take call?
I'm down. Who is it?
Jamal and Devin. So,
hey, Jamal.
So, guys, we're going to take a quick break because we went long, and we'll come back and we'll take your calls with more of our friend Jamira Burley right after this.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, Sirius XM's Progress.
Welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live right here, Monday, October 21st. We're here with Jamira Burley. Let's take a couple of calls. Jamira, people want to add something about, elaborate is the word of Devin. Here's Devin, our friend in Houston. How are you, Devin?
Hey, Dean, I haven't called you in a while.
I know.
You're so popular, I can't get
I don't know
through,
about
but
that.
I listen every day.
He's
Thank
too
you.
cool for school.
Not me. If I had more. Devin, I'm glad you're still listening. So what are you thinking about what Jamira said about Black history?
As far as the reason why they don't teach history of Black people in general, including, whether it be in America, Europe, even Canada or South America, is because the West needs the narrative that there's a good and there's a bad, and Black people has always been the floor of bad. And that's why, here's a perfect example of what I'm saying. Let's say, did you know that Sudan has more than double the pyramids Egypt has?
No,
You
I
ever
didn't
hear
know.
of it?
No.
No, you never hear of it. Because it's no way they can say it's not a fully Black country. No, Egypt's been invaded so many times since the New Kingdom, it's no longer an African country. And the reason they made up that little saying that, the 25th dynasty, that's why you see all these statues that look like Black people. There's no way they could have made all that stuff then. Those giant statues of Ramses and the Sphinx's head, that's before the 25th dynasty. But it has to have that. If we have history, we can no longer be the demons we are made out to be.
So is there any showing? So is there anywhere, Devin, that you can think of, or Jamira, where the achievements of African Americans or Africans has been celebrated in a way where, in Africa,
the Smithsonian,
right? I guess.
In Africa, it's definitely it's celebrated depending on where you go in Africa. I think there's still. When I went to South Africa, there was still a code of silence around for many of the conversations that I was in. I should be very specific. There was still a code of silence of talking around the apartheid. Right? They still, in many ways, have not dealt with the repercussions, the generational repercussions of that. Or the fact that after Nelson Mandela no longer was president, he got replaced by a very conservative president, and what that did for that community, very similar to what happened here after Barack Obama. So I do think there are pockets where African history is celebrated. Ethiopia is one of the only places that have not been colonized on the continent of Africa, and so their history is very rich. And so I think there are definitely moments, but oftentimes the celebration of Black culture is coupled with trauma or oppression of Black culture. And so there's never, even the Smithsonian, right? You have some good moments, but for the most part, it's coupled with so much trauma and hatred and generational oppression, to say the least.
Feel comfortable viewing us. It's a comfort zone.
Yeah.
That's how Western people have grown comfortable seeing Black people.
Mm-hmm.
Devin, how do you want?
How
do you want Black people? If you had your way, how would you want them to be depicted in American society, mainstream society today?
The mainstream society is we don't come from nothing that what is portrayed.
Yeah.
That is not the history or history. That's not true. You find Black people in all of history. Heck, there's even a story of a knight who fought with Lancelot. His name is Morin, the Black Knight. The Lone Ranger, it was based off of Bass Reeves, one of the two gunmen. And I think in Wild West history, you couldn't face up or he'll kill you. The other one being Wild Bill Hickok. Both of them dual wielders.
Or Jack Daniels, right, was created by, he got the recipe from his slave. And so there's,
I didn't know that.
Or, so there's oftentimes we look at Black history as separate from white history, when really there's so many moments that it's been intertwined that actually has allowed for innovation from white inventors to occur. And so I think to Devin's point is that we need to show the full picture. Oftentimes we're zooming in on one specific moment, but if we span out a little bit more, you'll actually see the contributions of Black folks in every single moment in American history that doesn't just always deal with trauma and oppression.
Devin, any last word?
Yeah. No, that's perfect. Just to show how intertwined Black people are in the world. Just show that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, Devin, thanks. It's interesting to hear what Devin's saying and what you're saying about the contributions and the achievements of Black people through time, and not just in our country, but in our country as well. And it just resonates with me so much because Muslim Americans, we've been doing this since 9/11, trying to show that we're not just about terrorism, and that Muslims have done things, and that we were here before America. Not me, but 10 to 15% of the slaves were Muslim. In fact, Alex Haley, in Roots, his original ancestor who came here was a Muslim, and in the second version of Roots, they really show it there. But also the places like he mentioned, who with Lancelot was a Black guy, and we'll talk about one of the guys who worked with George Washington was a Muslim, and you're like, look, there was a Muslim guy, and then there were Muslim slaves who fought on the side of the Union trying to get, and so we do the, we are, I guess if you're a minority in this country, this is part of our story, is trying to show you have a humanity, and that you're not defined by the way, frankly, white America wants to define all of us. And it's not always in the best way.
It's like, can we just tell the history of people in the world? Because all of us came from Africa, the migration of people, how that has happened, and also the fact that, to your point earlier, like Muslims are actually intertwined in almost every single culture around the world. They're not just brown people who participated in 9/11, right? They are the ones who sit next to us. They have been in our family, we just probably didn't know. And so I do think, to your point, it's like, how do we constantly have to reinvent ourselves or retell our story to make white people comfortable?
And I also
nobody got time for that,
right? And it was a great point you make. The studying of African and African Americans should not start with 400 years ago with slavery. It has to go beyond that. And that's not something I even thought about, to be honest with you, because I was saying, like, we have to have a curriculum. You got to start it there. You're right. It's got to start before that, about a civilization of a people who are human beings who are just living their lives. And then Whitey came.
And said, we'll give you guns if you give us bodies.
Showed up. Let's take a break. We'll come right back.
Jesus.
his show,
Your voice.
866-99-SIRIUS.
866-997-4748.
Let's make a difference together. This is the Dean Obadala Show.
On Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live here with our friend Jamira Burley right in studio. Let's take another call or two. Jamira's really sparked the phones. People want to talk about this issue, and I really appreciate it. Here's Jamal in West Virginia. Hey, Jamal, how are you?
Hey, what's going on, man?
How you doing, my friend? So what do you think? With Jamira here, what's your reaction?
Well, I want to make a couple of statements.
Sure.
African history. If you want to educate yourself on the ancient history of the continent of Africa, I have a couple of authors that you could start with. You could start with Sheikh Anta Diop. He's a Senegalese scholar. He wrote a classic book titled Civilization of Barbarism back in 1986, which is a scholarly work. It goes all the way back to the origins of man, all the way up to the development of African people on the continent and the dispersion of different races around the world. And he deals with the ancient civilization of Kush and Kemet, which the world know as Egypt, but the real name is Kemet, land of the blacks.
Right.
Okay? And another author, if you want to educate yourself, is Dr. Ben Yosef Jockhannon. The book is titled Black Man of the Nile. Another author, if you want to know about the civilization of Africa, is a book called They Came Before Columbus, about the ancient maritime trade that the ancient Kemetic people had traveling to what we know as America, and that you actually have ancient Egyptian pharaohs who, when they did autopsy on the mummified remains in their stomach area, they found cocaine, right? And the significance of that, everybody know the coca leaf is indigenous to where? The Western Hemisphere. So the Egyptians were traveling. That's why you got these large African heads down in Central America, right? So the Egyptians were traveling. And another statement, Dean, you made that Yahshua, who the world incorrectly calls JC, Jesus Christ, but his real name is Yahshua, because he come in his father's name, so therefore he must have Yah in his name. You understand? You said that he was a brown Semitic man. No, he was black. The Bible even described his characteristics, okay? And not only that, all the people in North Africa during ancient times were black prior to the Arabs invading and taking over. Egypt was black. All of North Africa was black, okay? The people that currently inhabit Israel today, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got like 40 seconds to the hard break, but go ahead, John.
Well, the people that inherit Israel today, those are Ashkenaz Khazarians. Those are converts. They converted during the 7th and 8th century. They originate in North Turkey, southern Russia. They converted strategically because of the war and fighting between the Islamists and the Christians from the west and Islamists from the south and the east.
Jamal, thank you, my friend. I have no choice. We have to break. I appreciate it. And I wrote the books down here, the idea of the civilization of barbarism and Black Men of the Nile. I'm definitely going to pick it up. Thank you, Jamal. Thanks for the call. Gotta go. Jamira, thank you, my friend, for your time. Thanks so much. Check her out on Twitter. She's great. We'll be right back with more of the Dean Obadala Show.